Clear with him. Fine. Oh, you got someone with you? Okay, hang on. Let's get him out. You got him? Got him. I gotta watch. His wrist is squirting out blood. We need him to the ambulance now. Okay, let's go squirt out. Blood go. Okay, come on. Go ahead, guys. Watch. Where's the ambulance at? But not yet. Not just yet. The story hadn't reached its climax. Not until the mask slipped. Not until the truth clawed its way to the surface. Okay, have a seat right here. As his hands told the tale of the horrific fate that Aisha Fraser was met with, it was difficult to tell him apart from the charismatic man that he once was, or was he ever that man? People will be left wondering. But before the horrific scenes of 2018, Lance had already given hints of what monstrosity he was capable of. It was a hot summer day on August 2nd, 2014, when the image of Lance Mason, the once respected judge and former state senator, was torn apart in a storm of rage and violence that no one saw coming. He wasn't wearing a robe that day. He wasn't behind a bench delivering rulings. He was behind the wheel of a car, his wife beside him and their children in the back seat. What should have been just another ride turned into a nightmare. Without warning, the calm, shattered Mason began pummeling his wife with his fists. 20 savage blows one after another, as if he had lost all sense of control, all sense of humanity. But he didn't stop there. With their terrified children watching from the back seat, he grabbed her head and slammed it into the car's center console. Not once, not twice, 5 brutal times. The force was enough to leave her dazed, bloodied, and in sheer panic she tried to escape, desperate to get out. But even then, outside the car, away from the steering wheel and the false sense of safety, he followed. He bit her. He threatened her. His rage didn't cool. It followed her out of the vehicle like a predator locked on its prey when the police arrested him later that day. The horror only deepened inside Mason's home was not the quiet book-filled sanctuary one might expect from a judge. It was a war-zone: shotguns, semi-automatic rifles, handguns, smoke grenades, a bulletproof vest, a sword. Victims often show signs abusers escalate, and yet too often the system doesn't catch the red flags until it's too late. This bill aims to change that. It includes mandatory risk assessment training for police officers would be trained to identify high-risk abusers, the kind most likely to commit lethal violence. Instead of treating each case as isolated, officers would learn to ask the right questions, recognize patterns, and respond with urgency. This means victims at the highest risk could finally be protected before tragedy strikes. Number 2 is the 24/7 access to protection orders. If someone needs a protection order at 2 a.m. on a Sunday, they shouldn't have to wait until Monday morning. Aisha's law would require courts to have judges or magistrates available 24/7 to issue emergency protective orders because violence doesn't wait, and neither should justice. The third key point includes an expanded definition of child endangerment, which means that if a child is present when abuse happens, that's not just a side note. It's another layer of trauma. The bill expands child endangerment to include witnessing domestic violence, holding abusers accountable for the psychological damage inflicted on children, even if they aren't physically harmed. And then lastly, a broader definition of aggravated murder. It expands the definition of aggravated murder to directly reflect the reality of domestic violence cases like Aisha Fraser's. It means that if someone purposely kills a family or household member and they already have a past conviction for domestic violence or any violent offense that caused serious harm to that same person, it can now be charged as aggravated murder. Let's be clear, this is huge. Why? Because in many past cases, abusers who escalated from beatings to murder weren't charged with the most serious level of homicide, even if their violence was part of a clear pattern. This update closes that gap and says, if you've seriously hurt someone before and you come back and kill them, you're facing the highest possible charge under the law. Why does this matter so much? Because Aisha Fraser did everything right. She left, She got help. She followed the legal steps, but the system didn't protect her. Her daughters witnessed the unthinkable, their mother's murder, after watching her suffer for years. This bill doesn't just honor Aisha's memory. It arms communities, law enforcement, and the justice system with the tools they need to prevent similar tragedies. And the stats are chilling. Nearly 112 Ohioans died from domestic violence in a single year. The stats also show that nearly half of domestic violence victims in Cleveland are at high risk of being killed. And shockingly, in Cuyahoga County, only 1 in 3 abusers ever spend a single day in jail. But up until now, change has been slow and scattered. Aisha's Law, named in honor of Aisha Fraser, has actually passed the Ohio House, not once, but twice yet. It's never made it all the way into law. Why? Because parts of the bill sparked pushback from prosecutors and criminal defense attorneys who disagreed with certain sections. As a result, both times it reached the Ohio Senate. It stalled, no vote, no law, no protection. Meanwhile, the threat to domestic violence victims hasn't slowed down, and survivors, they're still waiting for the system to catch up. Coming back to the man who once wore the robe of dignity and honor the one who decided the fate of others. Now his own fate rests in the hands of a parole board. Lance Mason, the former Cuyahoga County judge, once trusted to uphold justice, is now serving a life sentence for the brutal murder of his ex-wife. But here's the twist that's left. Many stunned he could one day walk free. After admitting to stabbing Aisha to death in front of their children, Mason was handed a life sentence. Yet it came with a caveat. He'll be eligible for parole in 35 years. That means at the age of 87, if he ever reaches it, the man who shattered a family and forever altered the lives of 2 young girls could make a case for his freedom. It's a painful reality for those who knew and loved Aisha, a respected teacher, a devoted mother, and a victim of unthinkable violence. Just 4 years before the murder, Mason had already served a shockingly brief sentence for violently attacking her in front of their children. He vowed then that he would never return to prison, but he did, and this time he's not leaving, at least not for 35 years. For many, the idea of parole feels like a second betrayal because some crimes they say deserve no second chances. But what do you think? Should someone who committed such a brutal act ever be eligible for parole, no matter how many years pass? Are 3 decades behind bars justice served? Or is it a loophole in a system meant to protect victims? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've made it this far, be sure to check out this next video. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you once again for watching. This was not a man at the beginning of his fall. This was someone already deep in descent. Mason had married his wife in 2005, but they were preparing for divorce, and by March 2014, they had separated. Still, that separation didn't offer her safety. Not truly, their divorce would only be finalized over a year. Later in November 2015, the courtroom fell silent as Lance Mason, once a powerful figure draped in robes and respected in legal circles, stepped forward. Now wearing a prison jumpsuit, wrists bound in cuffs, this wasn't a man accused of a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a man now facing the most horrific charge of all, the calculated violent murder of his ex-wife, Aisha Fraser. It was a cold, unforgiving day on Chagrin Boulevard when the horror unfolded behind the closed doors of Fraser's home. There were no warnings, no second chances. According to the grand jury, Mason didn't just kill. He planned it with purpose and calculation. He carried out an attack so brutal, it sent shockwaves through the very community he once served. Aisha Fraser, a beloved mother and school teacher, was stabbed to death. She had trusted the system to protect her. She had a protection order in place. But that paper shield was no match for the man who had already proven what he was capable of. Yes, Your Honor, but you understand, sir, that you are charged with 1 count of aggravated murder, 1 count of murder, 1 count of felonious assault, 1 count of violating a protection order, 1 count of grand theft, and 1 count of felonious assault. Do you understand the charges against you? Yes, Your Honor. Do you wish to enter a plea, sir? Not guilty. Court accepts the plea of not guilty. The court will at his arraignment. Mason stood still as the charges were read out one by one. Aggravated murder. Murder, felonious assault twice, violating a protection order. Grand theft. Each count painted a clearer picture of a man spiraling deeper into darkness. Each word, a knife to the memory of who he once was, and still he pleaded not guilty. The judge listened, watched, and responded with a bond that matched the weight of the crime. $5 million. A staggering amount for a staggering fall, but no number could reverse what had happened. No courtroom procedure could bring Aisha Fraser back, but then things changed for him. Whether it was his ego in the way or hidden love for his children, Lance pleaded guilty of his crimes in his pre-trial hearing sitting there in the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Police. He looked every bit the man who had shattered so many lives with his actions with an unsettling calm. He said that he wishes to take responsibility for the crimes he had committed. Those words were heavy, but they didn't feel like remorse. They felt like a man just going through the motions, as if this was some kind of routine procedure, not the acknowledgement of a life-altering, soul-crushing tragedy. But then he dropped a sentence that showed his vulnerability. There was no way I was going to let my daughter testify against me. As those words left his mouth, it became clear this wasn't just a crime of passion or rage. It was calculated. Cold. This was a man scared to face his daughter in the court, scared of losing the delusion of being a great father that he thought he was to his children. While I respect your decision to spare them the trauma of a trial, it was too little and way too late. Mason pled guilty to some of the most atrocious charges imaginable. Aggravated murder, 2 counts of felonious assault, murder, violating a protection order, and grand theft. Every single charge was a grim reminder of the violence he had unleashed that day. As the courtroom absorbed the weight of his admission, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. This wasn't just a man who had gone astray. This was a man who had once held power, who had been trusted with the law, but now was nothing more than a broken figure sitting before a judge to answer for the unspeakable destruction he had caused. Aisha Fraser was more than just a name in the news. She was a devoted mother, a cherished friend, and a beloved school teacher in Shaker Heights, Ohio, to her students. She was a source of light to her community. She was a role model. On a quiet November day, her life was stolen in the most horrifying way imaginable by a man who once promised to be her protector. Aisha saw the worst in a man who rose to the highest rank in a system that failed her so many times to a point of losing her life. That's the tragedy that sparked Aisha's Law, a bold piece of legislation introduced by Ohio State Representative Janine Boyd, and now supported by over 32 co-sponsors in the Ohio House. But Aisha's Law isn't just about one woman. It's about every person trapped in a cycle of domestic abuse. And it's about finally changing a system that failed her, one that fails so many. Now, what exactly is Aisha's Law? It is a multi-layered bill designed to intervene before abuse turns deadly. It's based on one simple truth that domestic violence homicides are predictable. But monsters don't always look like monsters until it's too late. The hypocrisy is hard to stomach. The same people who once praised Mason's uncharacteristic mistake were suddenly offering condolences and shock. But here's the truth. They saw the violence, and they still chose to protect him. Aisha did everything right. She got the protection order. She followed the system. But Lance Mason had already made his choice, and long before the headlines and the whispers before the scandal shattered the calm and sent shockwaves through Ohio's political circles. Lance Timothy Mason was just a boy growing up in Shaker Heights. Bright, ambitious, and already dreaming of something bigger. Born on August 26, 1967, he followed a path that seemed carved out for greatness, from the hallways of Shaker Heights High School to the academic rigor of the College of Worcester, and finally to the esteemed University of Michigan Law School, where he earned his Juris Doctor. In 1992, Mason's journey looked like the making of a legacy. Every step he took was calculated. Every role he stepped into only added to his growing reputation. Between 2002 and 2008, Mason served in the Ohio General Assembly, first as a representative, and then as a senator, moving through the ranks with a confidence that suggested he wasn't just part of the system, he was built for it. His dedication and charm caught the attention of then Governor Ted Strickland, who appointed him as a judge to the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas in 2008. A position of weight and visibility, a place where power wasn't just practiced, it was absolute. But the climb didn't end there. Nearly a decade later, in 2017, Mason returned to public service. This time as the Minority Business Development Administrator under Cleveland Mayor Frank G. Jackson. To outsiders, it seemed like a full circle moment. An accomplished man continuing to serve, continuing to lead. His name appeared in political rosters and press releases. His image still polished and his influence very much intact. This chaos unfolding before you is not caused by a street criminal, a drug mafia gang, or a wanted criminal. In front of this barrel was a respected judge, a former lawmaker, and a man who once held the power to decide the fate of others. But behind the polished image was a darkness no one saw coming until it was far too late. What unfolded next would leave an entire community shaken, and a family broken forever. As the police tried to catch him, Lance ran through the back door of his sister's house. Who was Lance Mason? And what on earth did he do to have a full task force arriving for his arrest? Lance Timothy Mason was not just another public servant. He was an epitome of authority, a man who had worn every badge of trust a city could offer, from walking the marble halls of the Ohio State House to commanding silence in the courtroom as a common pleas judge. His presence demanded respect, and his voice carried weight. He'd once shaped laws and passed judgments, upheld justice with a steady hand, and stood beside those shaping national policy in every room. He entered eyes, turned in every position. He held power, followed his resume, painted a portrait of excellence, polished and precise. State representative, senator, judge, city official. Mason didn't just play the game. He seemed to master it. And yet as he climbed, something else rose with him. Something that stayed hidden behind the speeches and handshakes. Something that no title could erase. But just when he thought he was untouchable, police were searching his sanctuary. Looking for him like a wanted criminal. Watch it. They got the dog up there. They're upstairs. Eye contact. Write it back. Do it now. Good enough. Enjoy lunch. Watch. Watch. Is anyone else in the house? My daughters and mine. In the quiet corners of his world behind closed doors, and far from the flash of cameras, tension was building. Those who paid close enough attention might have felt it, the way his polished smile sometimes didn't reach his eyes. The flicker of control beneath the calm. No one asked, and he never said. But the air around him began to shift slowly at first, like the hush before a storm. Then one day that storm came, November 17th, 2018. And more than 2,500 rounds of ammunition. It looked less like the home of a public servant and more like the stockpile of someone preparing for combat. It was chilling, not just the violence he had committed, but the world he had built behind closed doors. That attack got him 2 years in prison, but he only served 9 months. A slap on the wrist, a second chance he never deserved. You know why it was just a slap on the wrist when Lance Mason first beat his wife? Because powerful people were right there beside him, shielding him, vouching for him, smoothing the way back. Then he punched her so hard. She had to undergo surgery for a broken orbital bone. Their daughters were in the car when it happened. It wasn't just domestic violence. It was terrifying. And yet, when it came time to face consequences, Mason had an army of high-profile supporters ready to downplay the horror. U.S. Representative Marcia Fudge called him a good man who made a very bad mistake. Letters poured in from politicians, attorneys, and judges, all speaking about his character, his decades of service, his reputation. The victim, Aisha Fraser, barely seemed to factor in that collective influence worked. Mason got just 2 years in prison and was released after serving 9 months. 9 months for disfiguring a woman in front of her children. And then just a few years later, he murdered her, stabbed her to death in front of those same daughters. Suddenly, those glowing endorsements from the political and legal elite became a stain. Marcia Fudge released a statement expressing heartbreak and claiming that the man who committed the murder wasn't the Lance Mason she knew. But that raises an uncomfortable question. If someone beats their partner so viciously, they need surgery, how much more evidence do you need to protect the victim? During disciplinary hearings in 2017, other attorneys and judges again came to Mason's defense. They wrote letters expressing disbelief and emphasizing his achievements as a jurist. But the Ohio State Bar Association wasn't convinced. In their statement to the Supreme Court, they called out the letters for failing to explain what led to Mason's violent actions or offer any assurance that it wouldn't happen. Again, this is more than just a case of poor judgment. It's a case study in how power protects power even when it comes at the expense of a woman's life. Aisha was failed first by the justice system, then by the people who had the platform to do better. Instead of calling out the violence for what it was, too many were eager to excuse it, to write it off as an aberration from a man they respected. The day was supposed to be like any other, but for Aisha Fraser, it would be the last day she saw her children. The last day she could breathe freely. The two were supposed to meet at a decided place. It was the house owned by Lance Mason's sister, a house that would become the scene of unimaginable horror. Lance had already decided the fate of Aisha Fraser that day. A knife used as a weapon to stab the mother of his children. Lance Mason didn't just lose control. He planned it in front of their 2 children who could do nothing but watch in paralyzing fear. He attacked her. The sound of the knife cutting through the air was drowned by the agonizing cries of their children. They screamed for their mom, but it was already too late. And then in a final act of desperation, Mason fled. He didn't stop. He stole Aisha's SUV and sped off, but his attempt to escape wouldn't last long. In his reckless flight, he collided with a police cruiser, slamming into it with brutal force. The officer inside was injured, but Mason's terror was only beginning. He kept running thinking he could outrun his past, but fate had other plans. It wasn't long before the law caught up to him, and the nightmare he'd set in motion would begin to unravel inside the house. Lynn Mason, his own sister, was on the phone with 911, her voice shaking with disbelief as she watched her brother destroy everything in his path. He stabbed her, and she is dead. She said the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. Meanwhile, in the background, the children sobbed uncontrollably. Their cries were haunting evidence to the horror that had just unfolded. And when it did, it would leave scars so deep that even the highest seat of justice couldn't overlook them. The man who had once delivered verdicts from the bench would soon find himself on the other side of the law, bending his knees on the floor like he never saw what true power looked like. Chad, make sure. Let's get on your knees. Get him out on your knees. Little house. Hold on. I need to put my dog up there all the way up.